Hello and welcome to our book club. I'm Minnie Menon, and today we have another very interesting book. It's a story of glory, love, and terrible loss. The Last Queen tells this tale of Rani Jindal, the wife of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the creator of the Sikh Empire, and the mother of the tragic prince Dalip Singh, who lost that empire. She witnessed an amazing rise and also saw the terrible fall of the empire that her husband had built. But what also makes this book very, very interesting is the fact that it is written by one of the finest authors of our times, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, who has done a fabulous body of work. And this marks her first foray into historical writing. I wouldn't call it historical fiction writing. It's really a lovely combination of her intrinsic writing style and a character from history whose story was waiting to be told. Chitra joins us from Houston. Chitra, how wonderful to have you on Live History India. It's a real pleasure to talk to you, and congratulations on this book. As I said, it's a foray into the history of India, and a story that I'm very surprised hasn't been told in this form before.
Yes, I am very excited to present The Last Queen to all our readers in India. And thank you so much for having me on your show. This is something new for me. As you know, I have been focusing on mythology for my last couple of books, The Palace of Illusions about Draupadi and The Forest of Enchantments about Sita. But writing about a character who is historically so much closer to us, she's from the 1800s, was a challenge of a different kind, but it was also a great pleasure. And as you say, what amazed me is that here is this woman, she is just so exceptional, but nobody really told her story, for which I'm actually very happy because it gave me the chance to present her to my readers.
Right, Chitra, we have a special section in Live History India called Her Story because we are trying to fight the patriarchy of history, which is his story mostly. So,
Yes.
we come across so many lovely characters like this, and it's really sad. And I'm very glad that you picked up Rani Jindal. But why did you choose Rani Jindal from the Punjab? I'm very curious because there are many women who kind of mark their role in Indian history. Why Rani Jindal?
Sometimes I think that the subjects of my books choose me rather than me choosing the subject. So I was actually not even thinking of writing a historical novel. And I came across a wonderful book by William Dalrymple and Anita Anand. And it was on the Kohinoor. So I was interested, who wouldn't be interested in the Kohinoor? So just reading about it. And then they have just a short section, like maybe 3 pages on Rani Jindal. And it is about how she had been the queen, how she was, her kingdom was taken away, her son was taken away, the Kohinoor was taken away, everything is taken away from her and her son. And when I read about that, and yet she kept fighting the British till her last moment. And I really was so touched by the life of this courageous and hot-tempered, and she's just such a wonderful, complex character. I felt readers of today would really identify with her. There's so much to learn from her, but also just so much to feel along with her. And she chose me. After that, I couldn't think of anything else. I was like, I have to write her story.
Okay. And where did this journey take you? Because it's also would be a very unique space for you to occupy. It's the Punjab. It's the 19th century period of great conflict. It's very, very complex historically speaking because there are layers and multiple layers over there. So where did this journey of rediscovering Jindan really take you in terms of source material, in terms of literary records, etc.? It'll be very interesting to understand how you kind of scripted this story.
Right. So the first thing, once I decided that I would write about her, I started reading up everything I could find on her. And I found that there wasn't that much about Jindan herself. There really hasn't been there weren't any books that I could find, like major complete works. There were books and books and books about her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and he was a great man. But there was lots of material on him. And there was a lot of material on her son, Dalip Singh, because he was such a tragic figure. He lost the kingdom. He was taken away to England. He was really made into, quote unquote, an Englishman. He was called the Black Prince. He was called Victoria's Black Prince. He lost his entire I don't know, his entire culture, his entire sense of self. So there's a lot about him and a lot about her husband. And then in the middle, here she is, but there's very little. So I had to read books about her husband and her son and pull whatever material I could from that. But what was lucky for me is that she had written a lot of letters, and quite a few of those letters were still available. And these were letters she wrote in protest of what the British had done to her when they imprisoned her. They took away all of her money, basically. They took her son away from her. They put her first in one prison and then in another faraway prison, all of that. And she wrote about that. So I got a lot of material from there. And then, there were diaries of that time. There were uh, travel documents. The King Ranjit Singh's physician wrote a series of entries about life in the court of Punjab. So I took things from many places, but one of the sources that I really enjoyed the most is old photographs and paintings, because that gave me a real visual sense of how the Killa, Lahore Killa, where she was king, how did that Killa look? How did Calcutta, into which she came when she was finally, I don't know, reunited with her son after many years. How did that look? I love photographs. I'm very visual. So these were some of my sources.
I'm holding up your book. This picture of Jindal is also fabulous because it's really iconic. It's one of the few pictures or paintings that we have of hers. And she comes through as this really earthy but strong kind of a figure. There's hints of great beauty out there. But, and that famous emerald and pearl necklace that is a common reference point in the narrative. But I want to go back a little for our viewers as a sneak peek into Jindan's life. It's a fabulous story of a royal kennel keeper's daughter who falls in love with Ranjit Singh. It's not as though he kind of appropriates this young damsel who's really pretty and takes her on, but she actually falls in love with him. And was there a little bit of that strong female protagonist writing that you normally do that made you write it in this way where she was the lead and it wasn't as though she was being led?
Yes, definitely. I think, I'm always very keen to put my women in the center of their stories and see what is the agency that they might have in their own lives. Because I think when I read books, that's very, I don't know, that really speaks to me, that really inspires me. And I hope that that will inspire all our readers, but especially our women readers. Yes, her story is so amazing because, as you said, she has that earthy peasantness as much as she has that queenliness. She has both of those qualities. And she was just a royal kennel keeper's daughter. And, she came across Ranjit Singh and they got married. And we don't know very much of what happened. So that's the part I was able to imagine. So all those, empty spaces in her story, I imagined those and I created her character based on what I knew about her later when there's much more information. But yes, I definitely wanted to show that she was the one. She decided that she fell in love with Ranjit Singh and she was not going to go away. So, and his credit is he recognized something very unique about her. He recognized her strength, he recognized her intelligence, and he married her. She was the last of his queens. She was the youngest one. And she is the one with whom he often would discuss state matters, so that by the time he passed away, and I think, by towards the end of his life, he knew he was ill. And I think he wanted to prepare her to be able to survive in the world after he went away. He was gone. And he really did do that. But her intelligence was such that she could pick up on those things.
What also amazes one is how young she was, Chitra. I mean, her entire life played out until she died an old, beaten woman at just 46. I mean, it's hard to imagine that time scale. But what also stands out is that while she was young and the odds were against her, even in the Zenana, where she was an outsider in most matters, she held her own because that entire piece. And I know even in historical records, she's known to have said no to sati, to have walked out of the parda, even before she became Queen Mother. So, in many senses, there was this very fierce independence streak that she had. So, how do you, as a writer who's read about her and who's scripted her story, see her evolution as somebody who comes into her own for that brief period when the survival of her son is of utmost importance?
Yeah, what's really interesting is I think her growth begins when she goes into she's married to Ranjit Singh, and now she's entered the Zanana. And oh my goodness, the politics in the Zanana, you can just imagine. Everybody is at everyone's throat because all of them want the king's attention and they want the king's favor. And they hate whoever is the king's favorite, and that's Jindan. And she has to, so that's the first thing she has to learn, how to maneuver around all those plots. So that gives her a background. As I said, Ranjit Singh teaches her about the political relationships. He warns her about the British. But then I think it is the love for her son that transforms her. And I was really touched by that, how much she loves her son. She's willing to do anything for him. I mean, those are not easy things for her to do, to put away the veil, to come into court. And nobody wants her in court. The courtiers are like, you stay in the Zanana, we'll take care of the young king. We will, they really want to rule the kingdom. They don't want her to rule the kingdom. But she fights for her son. So she's a great example of a woman who is transformed by her mother love into becoming a queen, becoming a leader, going out there and talking to the Khalsa army. She knows that they're the only ones who might support her and give her the strength to really become Queen Regent, not just in name, but in action, in form. So I was very moved by that mother love.
As a history student, that period is just amazing how within 10 years, you have 4 rulers in Punjab. You have the entire edifice that Ranjit Singh built, that fabulous empire just crumble and kind of implode, And what's also interesting is the long, arduous journey between prisons and how she escapes from Chunar. I mean, I think that's spectacular. I mean, it's like a footnote. And I do know that you wouldn't have had too much of information on it, but I'm just thinking, oh my God, how would a woman have gotten out of prison, a Chunar fort, which is a formidable prison, and made her way to Nepal through
all the way to Nepal? Just imagine.
Unimaginable.
Right. It's right across the country, up into the mountains she goes. And she's not afraid. She's like, I would rather die than remain in a British prison. That's the spirit I wanted to really bring out. But the reason she's able to do all that is she inspired a lot of love in the people who followed her. So her maids, her masters, her spy master, all those people, they just were willing to lay down their lives for her, which tells me something about the kind of charismatic person she was. They knew she had nothing. She couldn't give them anything, but they were so faithful to her. I mean, all over Punjab, when the people heard that the British had taken her away to Chunar, to the prison in Chunar, there were uprisings everywhere. So she was really a greatly loved character. And yes, her strength, just amazing, just amazing. And she was really badly treated in prison. There was no money, they wouldn't give her proper food. her health really became bad. I think the British were just hoping she'd die and, they'd be rid of her. But she was determined. She was like, you're not going to get rid of me so easily. So she creates this plot, she gets out. And this is the wonderful thing about her. When she gets out, not only does she leave, but she leaves a letter behind. And that letter, which I put into The Last Queen, you must have seen it, is really a taunting letter. Like, yeah, you were doing all these terrible things to me, but look, I escaped by magic. And I love that spirit about Jindan. I think we have so much to learn from
Yeah.
her.
And then she finally gets reunited with her son. Again, it's a very tragic moment after being in Nepal for 11 years. And tell me, is the last leg of her life spent in England better chronicled? Did you get a sense of what it was like? The feeling of loss in a foreign land. It must have been completely overbearing for somebody like her who would come from such a different culture. Is that part of her life better chronicled? Or did you find material in the Nepal piece also? I mean, how did that later piece come together?
The later piece is better chronicled in some ways because the British write a lot about her, especially Lord and Lady Logan, who became the really the kind of parents of Dalip Singh after she's put in prison. Jindan's put in prison and Dalip is put in their care. They become his guardians. And Lady Logan writes a lot. She has like extensive diaries. So after Dalip goes to India, and the whole story is so beautiful. Dalip has been trying to get in touch with his mother. Jindan has been trying to get in touch with her son, but the letters are, they're just not allowed to reach each other. So Jindan, she's so sad in Nepal. She thinks my son has forgotten me, but Dalip has remembered her all this time. And he pretends to go to India on a tiger hunt, which was a popular thing among, rich British youngsters at that time, young men. That would be the adventure. So they're like, okay, you can go for a tiger hunt. But really his whole idea is I have to see my mother, and then hopefully we can just not be kept separate from each other. So that is the story. And so she comes, although she really hates, she has many reasons to hate the British. She does not want to go to England, but she says, if this is the only way I can be with my son, I will do it. And then she discovers that Dalit has really been brainwashed, right? The whole cultural appropriation has happened. He thinks of himself almost like an Englishman, and he has hatred, he has disgust for Indians. That's been inculcated into him. And she says, I have to change that. And that is what she does. That's her last victory, I think. That by the time she dies, he's been converted, right? He's been converted. He's a Christian, but she brings him back to his faith. She brings him back to an understanding of who his father was, what his kingdom was like, because he was just like 9 years old when everything's taken away from him. Of
Right.
course, he wouldn't remember. Of course, he wouldn't know. But she gives him back his pride in being an Indian king. And I think that's her greatest victory. She dies right after that, but I think that's her latest victory. She changes the course of Dalip Singh's life.
And then, of course, her body is brought, ashes are brought back, and she's cremated actually here. But tell me, what I find also interesting is her granddaughter is such a powerful figure. I mean, very few people connect Jindan and the granddaughter, right? I mean, they normally give the granddaughter more credit as being, Queen Victoria's, godchild, etc., etc. But there is a sense in which her granddaughter is part of the suffrage movement and comes back. And did you find any linkages between Jindan and her granddaughter?
Well,
Any kind of intellect?
they would never have met each other because when Jindan died, Dalip Singh was not married. But I really think that her spirit lived on in her granddaughter, and her granddaughter comes back to India. She's the one who creates a memorial. Jindan she had longed for her ashes to be put in the samadhi of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And the British wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't allow Dalip Singh to go back to Punjab. They were afraid there would be an uprising because he was still so popular, even though he was in England. Everybody remembered him. They longed for the king to come back. So they wouldn't allow that. So her ashes were actually kept somewhere else. They were in a samadhi somewhere else. And it's her granddaughter who later comes back and makes that happen, that desire that she had, that her ashes would be with her beloved husbands.
What is interesting for us, Chitra, is also the fact that there is a process of rediscovering Dalip Singh and the lost empire of the Sikhs in England, in the expat community overseas, because we've done some work on the tragic prince and how the memory of that period is being revived in many senses. So, do you see that a lot of works that you refer to are actually works which are being internationally done? What is the kind of work that is being done, which you found interesting in this space? Because I think there was a film also on the Rebel Queen that was released in the
Yes,
US. Did you manage to see it? I mean, did
I
you
did. I did see it.
also?
I did see it, and Shabana Azmi did a great job. And I was so happy because she read the book and she really enjoyed the book. She liked the book and she wrote a very nice comment for the book. And I think she's a great actress and she brings out that tragic strength of Jindan very well. But yes, a lot of the research I did, I looked at a lot of videos created by Sikhs in England, who remember Ranjit Singh and who remember more, even more, Dalip Singh, and really what was done to him, uh, how he was made to lose his culture and his kingdom. And yeah, so they are working hard to keep his memory alive, his legacy alive, where he used to be, where his estate was. They've made them all into historical spots that people now go and visit, and the entire history is up on plaques. And then again, like you said, Dalip's daughter's story, that's also of great interest
Right.
to the Sikh community in England. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's nice to see how
yeah.
it's part of their living heritage
And that's
that
how
they
you
being.
survive history. That's how the storytelling is so important to keep the legacies alive. So, but I'll come back to Jindan, but I have to ask you about my favorite books, which is Palace of Illusions and the Forest of Enchantment. The body of work that you do, and I was reading a lot about your initial years, Chitra, in the US, and how you started off as somebody who loved telling stories to your kids and dipped so deeply into folk tales from Bengal and India, mythology, and how that whole process came. But I'm very curious to understand how your own journey as an author kind of worked. I mean, we all know that you teach creative writing in Houston, but it's very interesting to see how you have taken the traditional and the modern expat US, kind of strains of your own life and kind of merged it together. And that is why I think Jindan is also something which is outside this purview. So I'll come back to that, but I would love to understand your own journey.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing is, I didn't even think I would ever become a writer. It was only after several years in the US that I felt this deep desire to explore my culture further, explore my backgrounds, especially I come from Bengal, so the Bengal folk tales, the Bengali way of living that I had grown up with, those became very important in novels like Sister of My Heart. The immigrant story became very important for me, how living in another culture changes us in many ways, but also allows us to see our own culture better and maybe understand and appreciate it better than when we were immersed in it. So a lot of my early work, and even now, I mean, I'm still interested in the constantly changing immigrant story. So that's remains like a very important part of what I do as a writer. But then, as you said, I became very interested in retelling the stories that I had grown up with. And those were the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. But as with all of my work, I felt it was very important to put a woman in the center and to tell her story, or have her tell her story in her own voice, just as I do with Rani Jindan. It was very important for me to give Rani Jindan her own voice, but also with Sita, also with Draupadi. And maybe through the retelling of the story, people will understand that story better. They will understand it from a different angle, and they will also appreciate the complexity and the strength of these mythological women, how they're timeless. And that, again, is my hope with Jindan, that people will see that the qualities that made her into a queen are timeless qualities, the qualities that made her such a good mother, such a caring mother, how courageous she was under all kinds of difficult circumstances. That's something I'm hoping that today, women readers reading today can really latch onto, and hopefully men readers too, because I don't think we should say that books about strong women should only be read by women. I think it's very important and healthy for a community and a culture that men read about strong women, women read about women and men read about men and women. And therefore we learn from each other, and we strengthen society together.
You know,
So
one
that's
question,
kind of my journey.
one question is often not asked of authors, and I'm going to ask you, is that there is an element of spirituality as well that I noticed in the mythology pieces, the Palace of Illusions and the Story of Enchantment. And I know that you're very influenced by Advaita, Vedantism, Swami Muktananda and Ramana Maharshi, etc. Has that also influenced the way you have looked at mythology and characters like Draupadi and Sita?
Yes, I think that's very true. And thank you for asking that question, because, it has made me see our human life as a journey. It's really a spiritual journey in which we learn about our true self. What is our relationship with people around us? What does it mean? What is the nature of power? How all worldly things pass away. And if they do, then what is it that we can hold on to? What is really worth holding on to? And that's something, and Jindan, that's another thing, that as I was reading and writing Jindan's story, I did a lot of research into the Sikh religion, because Jindan is very devout. She especially reads the Guru Granth, and she is very fond of Nanak's sayings. Nanak is a great guru for her. So, and even other gurus, Arjan Singh, for example, she gets a lot from that. So, there are things in the Sikh religion that really touched me. There's a real sense in the Sikh religion that power comes, riches come, and then they go. But how you behave towards your fellow men, towards your fellow human beings, that is something that remains, and that's really important.
That
And
also
giving to others.
that also adds a fabulous dimension to your works, Chitra. And I think that's what connected with me when I read those books, and I got it, and I could understand that connection because I'm also a beginner in that journey, but it's a very interesting space. I'm going to come back to Jindan, and I'm going to ask you. It's really sad that we don't know about women like Jindan. And through this journey, what is the one thing that stood out for you that was your eureka moment? Saying that, my God, I mean, how do we not know these kind of stories? And how many? Because every story in history, and that's our experience. We've done about 4,000 stories at Live History India. And I can't imagine how every story opens up the possibility of 20 other stories. That's the thing about history and the fabulous characters we have, because each layer opens up many multiple layers. So I think my question to you in a nutshell is, this journey, I'm sure, opened up many, many questions, many, many interesting characters or tangential people. So, are you going to go deeper into this genre of historical fiction writing? What is your own sense?
Yes, I'm very interested, and especially something that interests me is how, the whole occupation of India by the British. I mean, it is so terrible and tragic, the way the British just took over kingdom after kingdom after kingdom using the same tactics, dividing people, right? So they would contact some of the courtiers and they would say, if you help us, then when we take over the kingdom, you will get this and you will get that. So they divided and conquered over and over and over. So, I'm very interested now in seeing how that story ends. So I think I'm thinking about writing a novel that will be set around independence, when finally Indians are able to come together and say, this is enough, this is it. We are going to have our own nation, our own government, our own land back to us. But also, that was a very painful time with so much violence, so much death, the partition, all of that. So I'm very interested in that. And of course, that will be a real challenge because some great novels have already been written about that period. So I will have to think of an approach, a human approach again, maybe a human and spiritual kind of approach where someone goes through this and learns something important.
Chitra, how lovely to have you with us, and congratulations on Jindan, and wish you all the very best with it, and hope to see a lot more of you on Live History India as you, make this journey into understanding the milestones in history of India and trying to, use your fabulous skills to bring these periods alive for us. Many thanks.
Thank you so much for having me on this great show. And I want to say a big hello to all our listeners out there.